Well, my message tonight, Nehemiah chapter 6, if you have your Bible with you, Nehemiah chapter 6, and the message titled High Crimes and Misdemeanors or Fake News. Right? It sounds a little bit close to home, doesn't it? I've recently watched a couple, in the last several months, and one last night, some really amazing magic shows. And it's really cool when somebody is really skilled at the art of magic, because they can deceive you right before your eyes. They can trick you into thinking something is real when it's really not real, right? And I don't think it's any different when it comes to politics and news. And I think we have to be very careful to watch what's happening within the world. And I see all this stuff going on, and it's one of the things that I think is really interesting. When you begin to see politics unravel, you kind of, one way to tell what's really going on is to see who's happy about what's happening. You look at China, you look at the Muslim world, you look at the people who are celebrating the downfall of certain political figures, and it kind of makes you interested in why they are so happy about those things, and why they're probably even funding some of those things. But specifically what I'm talking about is, of course, just recently in the news, it's been Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's been under indictment, and then of course our own president, they're trying to impeach him. And so you see these things begin to roll out, and you kind of wonder what's really happening. I mean, anybody here been confused, like, is there really allegations? Is there something going on, I mean, and those are the things that we want to know, because, if truly there is a crime, excuse me, if truly there is a crime that was committed, we want that to be dealt with. But if there wasn't a crime that was committed, then you also want to see justice brought on that side too. And it's interesting, having said all that, and this isn't a political speech of any kind or a political sermon, because I'm not really about that. But what I thought was ironic is that we see exactly the same thing happen in our text, and that's where we pick up in Nehemiah chapter 6. Now, we've seen in this several tactics of the enemy trying to stop Nehemiah from building the wall. And that's really what this has been about. Nehemiah went to build this wall, to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, so that they could rebuild the city of Jerusalem. And so that was kind of the first step, was to fortify defenses so that I took some new medication. It was supposed to help me from coughing, but it seems to be making it worse. Some new defenses so that they could keep people who were trying to attack them out. And remember, Nehemiah came to Jerusalem at his request from the king, so that he could rebuild the city. And of course, God had promised them that he was going to put his name there, that he was going to make Israel a nation, his nation, that they were going to be great, and that through them, of course, was the promise of the Messiah. And so after 70 years of being out of Israel, they've been deported to Assyria, to Babylon, and then, of course, the Persians, the Medes and the Persians, now they're coming back. Some of them came back 70 years after the captivity, and now it's about over 100 years after the captivity, and Nehemiah comes back after the temple's been built and tries to rebuild the wall so that they could begin to rebuild the nation. And so that's kind of what we're looking at today, and all the attacks that came against them as they tried to reestablish and make Israel a nation again. And so that's what we're looking at, as we see these attacks. Now, last time we saw that the attack was kind of an internal thing. The people were fighting amongst themselves and charging each other exorbitant interests and taking advantage of the poor. And so they dealt with that. And now in chapter 6, it says, "Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, Gershom, the Arab, and the rest of the enemies heard that I had rebuilt the wall and that there were no breaks left in it, though at the time I had not hung the doors in the gates." And so now they're getting to where it's defensible. This is a wall that's 30 to 40 feet tall, and all the way around the city. They have several gates, and remember we talked about all the different gates and people built between the gates. And so there's these several gates with big giant iron hinges and bolts and bars, except for the sheep gate. Remember, that was the one that didn't have any bolts and bars. And this was how they protected the city, keeping these gates closed, defending, from the top of the wall. They could defend against enemies. And so all the enemies here, after saying that there's no way they could ever rebuild the wall, they were able to do it. And so all the enemies hear this. And it says that it was when they heard it that Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, "Come, let us meet together among the villages in the plain of Ono." But they thought to do me harm. Now, if someone invites you to a meeting in the plain of Ono, and you're going to be like, "Hey, wait a minute, I don't know about that." But this is just the enemy once again trying to distract them from the work. They've mocked them, they've threatened them harm, they've caused confusion, they've threatened, just caused them to be insecure, and now they're saying, "Hey, let's meet together. Let's have a peace treaty, or let's get together and talk." And so Nehemiah, verse 3 says, "So I sent messengers to them, saying, I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and go down to you?" I'm not going to stop doing what I've been called to do, what I've promised to do, just so I can come and sit and hear you guys complain about us building this wall. I know you don't want us to build the wall. I know you don't want Jerusalem to be a thing, but we're going to keep working to do that. It was interesting. I was reading an article the other day from the Washington Post, and this is a left-leaning publication, but I found it interesting because they said in the Washington Post that President Trump, and this is from the left-leaning viewpoint, he said President Trump is or has been the most honest president in the history of the United States. And the reason he says that, not because he agrees with President Trump or anything like that, but because he's one guy who's actually done the things that he said he was going to do in his political campaigns. Whether you agree with that or not, I thought that was an interesting thing, because we're just used to them telling us, "I'm going to do this, no new taxes. We're going to do that, we're going to do that, and we're going to reform this, and we're going to change that, and we're going to cut this and that, and then they don't do it, right? I mean, how many times have we watched a president come into office, and that's including President Reagan, all the way back to as far as they could find, Jackson and maybe even Washington, where they made promises of stuff they were going to do, but didn't do them. But, a businessman gets in office, and he's like, "I'm going to get it done," whether you liked it or not, and some people don't like it at all, and other people love it. But whatever the case is, I think that's interesting, and this is what Nehemiah's heart is. I'm not going to be detracted from the work. I'm going to do the work that I've been called to do. I'm not going to get distracted by your stinking meetings and whatever you want to do. I'm not going to do that. But they sent me this message 4 times, and I answered them in the same manner. So they're just trying to wear him down, just sending the same message. "Come meet with us. Come meet with." Pardon me. "Come meet with us," and he's just not going to do it. Then Sanballat sent his servant to me as before, the 5th time, with an open letter in his hand. So he, basically, this is kind of, I don't know if you guys ever seen it on the internet. It's not just a letter to somebody, but it's an open letter to everybody, to that person. I think that's kind of cowardly sometimes. But but that's kind of what he's doing. He's an open letter in his hand. He's basically saying, "I'm making a declaration here. I'm not just going to deliver a letter to you, but I'm going to make sure that I'm going to stand here and make you read the letter." And this is what it says, verse 6. "It was written, it is reported among the nations that Geshem says that you and the Jews plan to rebel. Therefore, according to these rumors, you are rebuilding the wall that you may be their king." Wow. So it goes from, "We don't want you to rebuild the wall. A fox jumps on it, it's going to fall down. You guys, we're laughing at them, or they're laughing at there's no way you could build that wall. You guys can't do anything. Ridiculing. We're going to attack you if you build the wall." Now they have the wall built, and they're they're blaming them for treason. And that's basically what he's saying. You guys are being treacherous against the king of Persia. And now you guys want to secede from Persia, stop paying tribute, the taxes that we talked about earlier, and basically you're going to establish yourself as king. And so this was not, of course, Nehemiah loved the king. He was the king's cupbearer. The king was the one who gave him permission to go and rebuild the wall, and the queen mother. I mean, there wasn't any malice in Nehemiah's heart towards the king. In fact, he was grateful to the king for allowing him to rebuild the wall and rebuild the city, and he was loyal to the king. And so this isn't what it is at all. But basically, this is the fifth tactic that we've seen, if you've been keeping track of these. And it's the enemy's tactic of spreading lies. He's going to spread lies. It's amazing how quickly a lie can travel. When somebody tells a story about somebody, and the problem is a lie is usually printed on the front page, and then when they find out it's not true, the retraction is printed on page 6 in a little corner. Not that they do that anymore because nobody reads newspapers, but you know what I'm talking about. Some of us seasoned believers. But it's it's interesting how that works. When somebody doesn't want somebody to move forward, or they want to tear them down, they spread lies. I was reading about Benjamin Netanyahu, and they were saying that he basically took gifts of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so, kind of reading into it, what they've done is they say, well, he got a gift of champagne from this guy, and he got a gift of cigars from this guy. And so he must have smoked at least 3 or 4 cigars a day and drank, champagne this much. And so they added up what that would cost, and that ended up being the fabricated number. It's just crazy, the things that people will do. But once they print that, hundreds of thousands of dollars, people gasp. They make $40,000 a year, and here's Benjamin Netanyahu just taking bribes and and all this stuff. It's really sad, but this is the kind of thing that happens. And so it says, and you have also appointed prophets to proclaim concerning you at Jerusalem, saying, there is a king in Judah. Now these matters will be reported to the king. So come, therefore, and let us consult together. So if you don't come down here to Ono, we're going to tell the king that you're trying to pull a coup. We're going to tell the king that you're gonna set up your own kingdom, and so all these false rumors that they're spreading. Notice how he responds to them, verse 8. I sent to him, saying, no such thing as you are saying are being done, but you invent them in your own heart. In Hebrew, you're spreading fake news. You're fake news. That's basically what he's saying. I'm very skeptical of pretty much anybody who is in office. I think that there's, I don't put my hope in political parties or presidents. I put my hope in Jesus, and I pray for my president, and I hope that he's going to make the best decisions. But at the end of the day, I'm not usually surprised when they do something crazy or whatever. So, it's hard not to see the parallels. Just a little bit ironic at this point here in Nehemiah, and I suppose that's just coincidence that we're going through this and our nation's going through this. But here, I love this about Nehemiah, and this is a great thing. He doesn't, he doesn't try to defend himself. He just ignores them pretty much. He doesn't even tweet. He doesn't do anything to rile everybody up. He just pretty much ignores them. He says, you're spreading fake news, forget about you. And then he's not going to spend any time defending himself. He's not going to send a delegation to the king to try to figure it out. He's not going to do any of that. He's saying, I'm busy doing the work. You guys are dumb. I'm just going to keep working. Verse 9, he says, for they all were trying to make us afraid, saying their hand will be weakened in the work, and it will not be done. Now, therefore, O God, strengthen my hand. So Nehemiah's response, same as it's always been. And you'll notice this. He just prays and just keeps on moving. He recognizes the enemy's tactic and doesn't need to defend himself. Fear's a liar. He knows that it's just fear a fear tactic. And how many times does God tell us not to fear? I've heard, and I've never counted it, but I've heard that there's 365 phrases, do not fear, in the Bible. One for every day of the year. I've probably heard that before too. But that doesn't stop the enemy from spreading more lies. It doesn't stop the enemy from lying about you, lying to you about other people. And that's just one of the enemy's tactics, is to try to get you to be fearful about what people think about you, about your future, about what God has called you to do. I remember coming out here and planting a church, and at times just being gripped by fear. Like, what are we doing? How can we move forward? How can we do this? And just having to stop what we were doing. And there were times even when Shannon and I came out here at the beginning and things were hard. Think about who cleaned the church, who mowed the lawn, who moved the water, Shannon and I did it all, because there wasn't hardly anybody in the church, and everybody was working, and we were working too, but we're in charge, so we had to do it all. And there were times it was just exhausting and fearful, and we didn't know what God was going to do. Are people even going to start coming to church? Is this just a fool's errand? And the enemy would tell us all those things, and at the end of the day, we just had to stop and not encourage ourselves, well, I'm good enough and I'm smart enough and gosh darn it, people like me, or something like that, but just to say, Lord, this is how we feel, and this is where we're at, and this is what's going on, and this is what these people are saying, and this is what these people have done, or this is what we're facing, this is the workload we're under, or whatever, and just lay it before the Lord, and just watch the Lord begin to lift those burdens, begin to draw the people in, to bring laborers for the harvest, and just to begin to build the church. And it wasn't because we thought we knew what we were doing, and it wasn't because we thought that we were smart enough. It was always because we stopped and we gave it to the Lord. And I think I think that's the problem so often when it comes to personal fear, is that we hold on to it and we believe it. We shouldn't believe the lies of the enemy or the fear of the enemy, or what people are saying, or what we think people are saying. Those things are all unimportant in terms of what God is saying and doing in our lives. And so really to take that time, and this is what Nehemiah does, he takes that time and he says, strengthen my hands, O God. Strengthen my hands. And that's where we need to come back to oftentimes when we're fearful or when we're uncertain, because God is the one who establishes us and gives us direction and keeps us in the center of what he wants us to do. And what he thinks about us is more important than what anybody else thinks, right? We don't have to worry about what man says. We only have to worry about what the Lord wants. Now, that's difficult at times too, and I just want to say this, because I think sometimes you're thinking, well, yeah, but God is so angry with me. I'm such a failure, and you don't understand, Pastor Mike. I made so many mistakes. I've done so many things wrong, and I just can't, expect God to bless me at all because I'm such a wretch. Well, guess what? All of us are wretches. All of us make mistakes. All of us fail. And I was just thinking, you probably saw Anea running around here, the little baby. That, she's my baby, right? I love that little kid. And she makes mistakes. Man, she messes herself. She wets herself. She screams at me. Sometimes she's even pinched me. She's bit the kids. She's never bitten me. But she's bitten kids. And what do we do? Just kick her to the curb? Yeah, you dumb little kid. You're out of here. No, it doesn't matter what she does. She could commit baby murder and we would love her, because she's our child. And when God says you need to come to me like a little child, he's saying you need to come to me like a toddler. And I think that's where we need to understand that God's view of us isn't as these mature, developed, smart, responsible people that we might think we are at times. But he sees us as little children, foolish little children that need to come to a father in a way that recognizes that we are that precious to him. the same, just as precious as a little baby is to me, and my children are to me. You know, and we have to think that God thinks the same as us, and God's desire for us is that he would bless our lives. But I made mistakes. Well, there's a solution for that. Tell God you made the mistake. Confess your sin, right? 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sin, he's faithful and just to forgive us our sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. He cleanses us from how much unrighteousness? All of it, right? If I confess it. What is that? What does that mean? It means to say that it was sin. That's what confession is. I confess. I did it. I failed. I did something stupid. I looked at that. I did that. I said that. I went there. I drank that. I ate that. I smoked that. I did that. God, I know it was wrong. I know it was wrong. And then he's faithful, which means he always will, right? If somebody's faithful, it means they're consistent, right? He always will. And he's just. What does that mean? He's righteous. He's legally able to forgive us of our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. All unrighteousness. And so what stands between me and God? Nothing. What can come against God's elect? Nothing. And so we can come to God boldly. And why do we come boldly? Hebrews tells us we come boldly for grace and mercy. Not for reward and because you're good enough, but for grace. When do you need grace? Because you don't deserve it. Why do you need mercy? Because you deserve something bad, you know? And so you come for grace and mercy to help in time of need. And so this is our relationship with God. Yeah, we are messed up and you make mistakes, but God knows that. He can change your bum. He can fix it up. He can, wipe your owie off and clean you up. Yeah, you made a mistake. Confess it before the Lord. Come before the Lord and start to spend time in his presence. You'll notice something, that the more time you sit in his presence, the more you learn of him, the less you make mistakes. The longer you walk with him, the closer you walk with him, the more he perfects you. Now, I know we'll never be perfected completely this side of heaven, but you should be able to look back on your life and say, I'm not there yet, but I'm a lot farther than I was 5 years ago, or 1 year ago, or 10 years ago, or whatever it might be. Because we're making progress in our Christian life as we spend time in his presence. And that's really what the Christian life is about. And so this is exactly what Nehemiah does. He says, now therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. Don't let me be fearful. Don't let me stop doing what I've been called to do. Help me just to press forward and to continue in the work. Verse 10, it says, afterward, I came to the house of Shemaiah, the son of Deliah, the son of Mehetabel, who was a secret informer, and he said to me, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple, and let us close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you. Indeed, at night they will come to kill you. So this is a really complex thing, but here's this guy supposed to be an informant for Nehemiah. He obviously has access to some of the information, maybe the army or whatever of these these different kings. And he's saying, I'm coming to give you this intel on the enemy, and he brings this report that the enemy wants to kill you. They're going to come. They're coming tonight. They're going to kill you. They're going to take your life from you. If somebody came to you and told you that, you need to go hide in the temple. Go in the temple and shut the doors. Now, what's wrong with that? Is the governor of Judea supposed to go into the temple? No, he's not supposed to go into the temple. The temple is for the priests, right? The temple is only the priests, and only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies, but only the priests were supposed to go into the temple. And so here he's telling him, you need to hide, you need to do something. And what the enemy wants Nehemiah to do is to go into the temple and hide from the enemy, to show fear before the people. And he says they're going to kill you. So verse 11 it says, and I said, should such a man as I flee And who is there, such as I, who would go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in. So I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to, should such as a man as I. And what does he mean by that? He was a man of high official status as the king's cupbearer, but I don't think that's what he's saying. I think he's saying, and I don't even think he was saying, as such a man as I, a governor. I think he's saying, such a man as I, as one who fears the Lord. This is similar to what Joseph said. How can a man like me, and that's kind of, the phrase is very similar, sin against God and do this great wickedness, when he was in the temptation with Bathsheba. And it doesn't matter what the temptation is, whether it's one like Joseph faced or one like Nehemiah faced. How can I, a child of the king, do something like that? And I think that we should tell ourselves that sometimes. We're facing some challenge, we're looking at some awful circumstance or something that's coming against us. Shall such a person as I do that? Absolutely not. I'm not gonna go there. And their temptation is very different, but both saw themselves as being God's representatives. And if I'm going to represent God, how can I show fear? How can I do that wickedness or do that sin? And it should always be the same for us. Just fill in the blank. Verse 12, it says, Then I perceived that God had not sent him at all, but that he pronounced this prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. So, whenever we're gripped with fear, we have to recognize that God doesn't motivate us by fear. God doesn't motivate you by fear. You think about what Jesus says. He says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. If we find ourselves under a heavy burden, under a heavy yoke, full of fear, is that the Lord trying to motivate us to shrink back, to not do, to go the other way? No, that's the enemy. The enemy is the one who motivates by fear. And so we have to recognize that the enemy gives us fear, but the Holy Spirit gives us peace, right? And so we don't want to do things that are against the peace that the Lord gives us. But if a man's claiming to speak for God, and he brings something to you, and it strikes fear in your heart, I mean, if you're a non-believer, that's another thing. But if you're a believer, then it should maybe convict you, which draws you close to the Lord, but it shouldn't be that condemning fear that drives you away from the Lord. That's the way the Lord works. He's always drawing us to himself. He may convict you of sin. I remember one time I had a friend who was in an inappropriate relationship, and I didn't know that he was in an inappropriate relationship, but I felt like the Lord was telling me I needed to go tell him that I was concerned for him about his relationship with a specific woman. And so I was not excited at all to do that. And I honestly, I think that that's probably a qualification when the Lord's sending you to somebody to correct them. If you're excited to go do it, to set them straight, you're probably not being sent by the Lord. But if you're heartbroken for them, which I was, and I went and told him, I said, hey, I don't know what's going on with you and her, but I'm really concerned about you. And, I just felt like the Lord told me to come and tell you that he's concerned about you. And he blew me off. He's like, whatever, man, I'm fine. Things are good. Things are wonderful. I'm doing great, and, everything's great, and whatever. Okay, and I just felt like I got kicked in the stomach a little bit, but I felt like I needed to go and talk to him about it. And once I said that to him, and once, it was off my chest, then I felt fine about it. But later he came to me and he said, man, you had no idea. And then he told me what he was doing, like everything that he was into with this person. And he's like, yeah, when you came to me, it just kind of broke my heart, and I realized, man, I need to repent. And he repented. And that should be the way that works. If the Lord's bringing something to you from somebody, then it's going to bring that conviction, or it's going to bring peace. But if it strikes fear, if it makes you feel, like pushed away from God, that's what the enemy wants to do. That's exactly what they're trying to do. God's not going to protect you. You need to run and hide, in the temple. And so he realizes this guy, he just senses maybe a gift of discernment. This guy's not from the Lord. This guy must have been hired by Sanballat and Tobiah. So it says, for this reason, verse 13, for this reason he was hired that I should be afraid and act that way and sin, so that I might have a cause, or that they might have a cause for evil report, that they might reproach me. So it can be a powerful weapon, but we have to understand that God is with us. Even though somebody brings some fearful thing to us or some threat to us, if we're doing what God's called us to do and we're living for him, we really have nothing to fear. I love the verse that says, what can man do to me? What can man do to you? Kill you? We're so afraid of death, sometimes. But honestly, death is a homecoming for the Christian. It's amazing to read through the history of Christianity and the people who, following the Lord, coming under persecution, find themselves at the threat of death, and then they end up dying and giving up their life because they won't deny Christ. And what a blessing they end up being for the church. In fact, it's in times of persecution like that, when people are giving up their life for Christ, that the church grows and flourishes. And why is that? Why do you think that the church would grow and flourish under death and persecution? Well, it's actually pretty simple. When people see that there's somebody living for something that's worth dying for, and that there's hope in eternity, because people are lost and miserable. People are not happy in their lives. And when they see somebody with resolution and peace on their face, and they go to the stake and they're burnt for their faith, or whatever happens to them, and they see the way that they die, a lot of people end up converting to that, because they're like, man, I want to have what they have. I want to have the peace that they have, and if it means I die for it, it's worth it, because right now I'm miserable, right? So there's a walking with the Lord and having that strength of the Lord in your life really removes all fear, removes all anxieties. But then there's suffering, right? So I think that for years I would say, man, I really hope that someday I die and go and be with the Lord, but I don't want to suffer on the way there, right? I mean, isn't that the way we talk oftentimes? I don't care if they kill me, I just don't want them to torture me. But see, that was a mistake that I made, saying that. Because remember what Paul says in Philippians chapter 3, that I might know him and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death. There's a certain grace, there's a certain intimacy even in suffering for Christ. And if you read enough about Christians who suffer for their faith and the things that they go through, whether it's jail or beatings, persecutions, that it is in the midst of those things, when they go through them, that Jesus meets them in a way that people who have never suffered don't ever really get to experience this side of heaven. And from what I understand, if you read Richard Warmbrand's experiences, suffering's never a fun thing. It's not like, oh boy, look, I get to suffer or something like that. But when they do, they're given a grace that they don't want to lose. They're given a joy of the Lord that they had never experienced when life was easy. And so as Christians, not only do we not have to fear death, but there's also reward in suffering, which isn't a super popular message. I probably never preached the message, the joys of suffering. But there's a reality to that. And so there is really literally nothing that we have to fear. The only thing that we should fear is fear itself. No, just kidding. The only thing that we should fear, well, in a way, it is not being close to the Lord. You know, and in the same way, and I think that probably that saying it a different way is that we should have a fear of the Lord. You know, not a trepidation as though God's going to destroy me, but I don't want to be outside. I want to fear being outside of his perfect will for my life. And so this is what Nehemiah had a cush job. You think about it. He was the cupbearer to the king. He was treated like royalty. He stood next to the king. He got to eat and drink the food that the king ate and drank. He lived in a plush palace. He had servants and all those types of things. And he left that, the comforts of the palace, to come and face all this drama in Judea. Why? Because that's what God called him to do. And so when God calls us to do something, we, by faith, we go and do it, and then we don't fear, because the Lord is strong. And so, you know, it can be a powerful weapon, but we have to understand God's with us. In fact, Paul would tell Timothy in 2 Timothy 1:7, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind." You know, there is something about our relationship with the Lord, when we walk with the Lord, and we know what God's called us to do, and we're on the track of where God has called us to be, that everything just becomes so clear. And nothing can detract us from it when we're really in that place. And so that's what he's saying. He says, not only are you not afraid of anything, you know, kind of no fear type of thing, but you're sound of mind in your lack of fear. Now, one time, Sean, Tim, and we used to work at a radio station in Pocatello, and we would do the Rock Solid program. It was a Christian rock program that we would do, and we'd end at midnight, and then the night guy would come in, whoever was the night guy. And we thought it was fun to haze that person if they were new. So basically what would happen is we would go down to the convenience store down at the end of the street and wait till about 1 in the morning after our shift, drink some coffee, and then come back to the building and make creepy noises while they were there. And different people had different experiences with that. You know, this guy by the name of Barry, he's one of my Facebook friends, hopefully he's not watching, but this guy Barry, we went into the sanctuary, we started making noises and stuff, and he comes ripping out of the studio, and you know, the studio's right there at the bottom of the stairs in the sanctuary. He comes ripping out of the studio, and he's like, "Who's up there? Come out, show yourself." Like he was ready to fight, like no fear. I'm gonna take you out, you know. And we were fearful. "Hey, no, it's just us. We're just messing with you. Sorry, man," you know. But then there was another guy, and he's my Facebook friend too. So I'll leave him out. I won't name him. But he heard the noises, and he locked the door, and he barricaded the door. And so Sean and I, we just, because of that response, and I honestly think this is the way the enemy works too. I know it's horrible to think that I was just like the enemy, but because of his response, we upped the ante, right? And so we went outside, and we were looking through the window, and he's in there. We'd taken the phone off the hook, so he couldn't call the police downstairs. You know, this is back in the day before cell phones. So he's sitting in the studio. He's getting ready to go on the air maybe and call for help. You know, he's in there. It's the middle of the night. Nobody's listening. And he's just in there, and he's praying. And he has everything stacked up against the door, you know. And so we come around the other side, and Sean starts to scratch on the door. And I was like, we better stop. He's freaking out. He's gonna call. So finally we're like, "Hey, it's just us." I almost said his name. "It's just us. It's okay. You can come out." We hear the stuff moved away from the door, and he opens the door. And you remember the No Fear shirts? Everybody was wearing No Fear shirts in those days in the early 90s. He actually had a shirt on that said "Scared Guy." I'm not even kidding. It was a parody of the No Fear shirt, but it said "Scared Guy." We just started laughing. I don't know why I told that story, but anyway, just for fun. But God hasn't given us a spirit of fear. We don't have to be afraid. When God's called us to do something, He's going to provide. He's going to take care of the details, and we can walk in confidence. And confidence because we're His child. We always have to remember, we always have to go back there, put ourselves in that place. We're His little child. He cares for us. He's going to take care of us, and we can trust in Him. Verse 14, it says, Nehemiah praying, he says, my God, remember Tobiah and Sanballat according to their works, and excuse me, and the prophetess Noadiah, and the rest of the prophets who have made me afraid. So this is a beautiful thing. You notice what he says there. They've made me afraid. So he was afraid, and then he gave it to the Lord so he wouldn't be afraid anymore. It's just because, it's just because he's bold doesn't mean he wasn't afraid. I guarantee you, my friend Barry was afraid when he came out and said, "Who's up there?" He didn't know if somebody had a gun or what, But he was courageous, right? And courageous is being afraid and doing it anyway, right? Or doing what you feel like you're supposed to do anyway. And so he says he admits that he was afraid. And it seems like all these people were involved in this conspiracy. And he just puts them in the hands of the Lord. Now, this is the most powerful thing you can do when people have wronged you. When people have done something evil to you. Now, last time we talked about this in Romans chapter 12. If your enemy's thirsty, give him a drink. If he's hungry, give him something to eat. But even more so than blessing those who are persecuting you or doing good to those who have done wrong to you, to put them into the Lord's hands. And that's exactly what Nehemiah does. He puts these people who've done him evil into the Lord's hands. Sometimes people that do you evil are people who are part of church. You guys ever experienced that? You're just trying to serve the Lord, and people who are well-meaning and, seem to love the Lord themselves sometimes come against us. And maybe it's because they have different ideas of what is supposed to happen, or maybe they're just, in the flesh, or maybe, but whatever the reason is they'll come against you when you're trying to do the Lord's work. And sometimes the enemy uses our brothers, as we saw last time, to do that. And so he doesn't, this is interesting, he doesn't arrest them, he doesn't have them killed. Maybe he could have done that as the governor, I don't know. But he gives them to the Lord. And maybe they were prominent people. This woman's a prophetess, right? Noadiah. But he doesn't do anything with it other than just put them in the hands of the Lord. And so with all of this, notice this, verse 15. So the wall was finished on the 25th day of Elul in 52 days. So whenever we set out, and this is kind of what we're talking about in this series, is restoring our lives. And when we set out to restore, rebuild our lives, and put back the pieces that have been destroyed, or trying to build back up those pieces that have been broken down, we're going to face obstacles. You're going to have setbacks. You're going to be attacked. Maybe you're going through a process of recovery. Maybe you're trying to overcome some sort of breakup in your life, or some difficulty in your life, or you're just having a difficult time. Maybe change of jobs, or maybe you lost your job. But whatever obstacle you face, and you're trying to put your life back together, you're going to face obstacles. You're going to face problems. There's always going to be those roadblocks and those snares that you're going to face. It had to have been difficult to finish a wall in 52 days. Impossible, actually, even without the attacks. Think about that. 52 days from the day that Nehemiah says, let's rise up and build. 52 days later, that wall was built and those gates were hung. That's a miracle. Even in the midst of that, they went through attacks and trials, but God was with them. And God is with you. So don't fall for the tricks of the enemy. Now, what's wonderful about this is, in spite of all the attack, even their enemies, as we're going to see, recognize that had to be God. That had to be their God that did that for them, because there's no way that they could have ever done that themselves. Now, this seems like a little bit of a short verse. Like there should have been, when they finished the temple, remember that? They sacrificed animals, they blew the trumpets, whatever. They didn't even have so much as a pizza party here. They just finished the wall, and that's it. We have 52 days, and they finished the wall. Wah, 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 wah. Then no celebration, no shouting of joy. But this speaks to the fact that it was God's work to build the wall. And what's interesting about that is, even though it was God's work to build the wall, he had them build the wall. And that was really what God was working in, not the wall. I mean, like we said before, God could have just said, he didn't even have to speak a word. All he did was have to go, and the whole wall would have just popped up by itself. I mean, God doesn't even have to say anything, and it would have done it. He would have willed the wall to be completed. But instead, he used the people to build the wall while they were being attacked. And so I would submit to you that God wasn't building the wall. God was building the people. And that's always the case. God's not into building walls so much, or building temples, or building church buildings, or building whatever it is we build. He builds them through us because he's truly just building us. He's taking you through that trial to refine you, to put you together brick by brick. Not trying to build edifices and walls and fortresses. He's building his people. And God's work is always people. That's why when the people, they thought the temple was so grand, it was so wonderful and everything, but the second that the people stopped worshiping the Lord and started turning the temple into an idol's temple, he didn't care about the stupid temple. He can just have that thing burnt down. All the gold and everything with it doesn't matter, because what mattered was the people. And the people needed to learn a lesson. And so he would send the people away to captivity so that they could get their fill of idols in Babylon and come back a little bit more humble and build maybe a lesser temple so that they could worship God again with the pure heart, because that's really all God cares about. He doesn't care about temples, he doesn't care about buildings, he doesn't care about any of that stuff, but he uses those things to refine the people. And so when God sends us on that building project, when God sends us to do that thing or that, the other thing, it's not to get that building done, and he'll use it for his glory as long as we glorify him. But he does it to build us, to build our faith, to let us see that when we go through that trial and they came against us and they said, you can't build it now, and they pulled the permit, or they revoked our permit, or whatever happens to us as we move forward, and we get together and we just seek the Lord in prayer. What happens is now we're closer to the Lord because we've got serious with the Lord, and we say, Lord, we need to hear your voice. And so we hear God's voice, and then we see God open doors, and we see God remove obstacles, and we see God build the thing. And then we can say, wow, God is God. God is worthy of our praise. He's worthy of our worship because he did this, even though we did it, right? Even though we put the bricks in, even though we gave the money, or we, made the plans, God's the one who put it together. And when we look back on it, we see that. And that's what's important. God can do whatever he wants to do, but ultimately he's into building people. Not just the people who he's working with, but also to the people he's opposing. And that's just something that we don't think about. I just think about that, about Corrie ten Boom when she was, with Betsy in the concentration camp. Have you ever read The Hiding Place? And Betsy begins to tell her about, the mansion that they were going to have, and that all the people that had been in concentration camps like them would be able to go to this mansion. And she talked about the tapestries and the walking gardens and the architecture and the buttresses, the flying buttresses that would come off the sides of the mansion. It would be so big, it would just be beautiful, and giant windows, and just be a place of serenity and beauty for people in the concentration camps. And so when she got out of the concentration camps, it was a surprise, but not too big of a surprise, when a very wealthy woman came to her and said, I have a mansion estate that I'd like to give to you so that people from the concentration camps could go and be there. It was exactly like Betsy described. But that's fascinating. That's beautiful. But what's even more beautiful is the fact that Betsy would say, but I want the concentration camps to be repainted in a beautiful green color, speaking of life. And Betsy would tell her how they would look and what the grounds would look like and what they would do for the barracks and stuff. And those concentration camps would be for the people who worked in the concentration camps, beating people and mistreating people. And it would be a retreat center for them to go and hear about the forgiveness and love of God. And the watch shop, the Beiji that they lived in, that would become a place for those who had betrayed their countrymen. That when the war was over and when Hitler was down and when Germany wasn't in charge anymore, that they would open up the watch shop, and those who had sold out the Jews that went into the concentration camps, those who had sold out their countrymen to go be in the concentration camps, that they would be able to come there, because this is what Betsy said, because nobody will want to take them in. Nobody will care about them. And so Corey opened up the Beiji and brought in people who had betrayed their fellow men. This isn't the way we think. What do you do to your enemies? You strip them naked, you walk them down the street, and you spit on them and you beat them, and then you have them executed publicly, right? That's the way the world sees it. But God doesn't build walls and bless his people just so that his people can be blessed and know that he's God. He blesses and builds walls and does these miracles so that even the world can look and say, wait a minute, maybe I'm headed the wrong way. Well, how could this person love me after everything I've done? Sounds pretty familiar, right? Isn't that where we just were? How could God love me after everything I've done? He does. He does, and he makes provision even for that. It says, verse 16, it happened when all the enemies heard of it, and all the nations around saw these things, that they were very disheartened in their own eyes, for they perceived that this work was done by our God. They looked at it, they saw it, and they said, that's a miracle. There's no way those people, especially with all the threats and all the things that we've done to them, that they could have done it. So they recognize that it's God. And this is the greatest revenge that we can have on our enemy, the devil, is to finish the work that God has called us to do so that it might be a witness to the world. In verse 17, it says, also in those days, the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and the letters of Tobiah came to them. For many in Judah were pledged to him, because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Ara, and his son Jehoahan, Hannah, whatever, and had married the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah. So Nehemiah finds out that there's many people, high-ranking people within the city, who were working, conspiring with the enemy. How did that feel? It's like, oh my gosh, here I am trying to do this work, and the whole time, a lot of these prominent people are collaborating with the enemy. What this is, and this is very common, is that people are putting their human relationships above their relationship with God. And that's why they're doing what they're doing. Because they think maybe there's some benefit from it, or maybe they're trying to be loyal to family. But the biggest enemy to the work of God isn't the Sanballats and Tobiahs. It's the person who undermines the work of God from within. And that's the biggest enemy to the work of God. Those who try to stop God from doing the work, who try to discourage those who are doing the work. Verse 19, it says, also they reported his good deeds before me, Sanballats, and reported my words to him. Tobiah sent letters to frighten me. One of the ways that you know that you're doing God's work is that the enemies are opposing you. And that can be people that are close to you. Look at, there's always going to be a Judas. There's always going to be a Ahithophel, and there's always going to be people who don't like you, no matter how much you try to be likable. I think I'm a pretty likable guy, I hope. There's people that just decided they wouldn't like me, and that's okay, because I just want to do what the Lord wants me to do. Thankfully, and I say that, it's very few and far between people that I've ever had any problems with. And it seems like the Lord's been very, very gracious to us. Praise the Lord, and please, Lord, keep it that way. But but I know a lot of guys who've really suffered at the hands of their fellow brothers, church splits and people trying to pull coups within the church and all kinds of things like that. And, praise the Lord, so far we haven't had to deal with any of those types of things. But no matter what comes, we keep our eyes on Jesus. You do what the Lord tells you to do. I don't remember if I shared this recently, but it doesn't matter. I remember, it's good for me to repeat things. Didn't Paul say that? It's beneficial. I remember when I was a new Christian, and I went to a Carmen concert. I know, weird. But anyway, I was at this Carmen concert, and it was a weird concert. It was very weird. But anyway, aside from that, at the end of it, Carmen just had everybody stand up in their seats, and we just started singing, "I Have Decided to Follow Jesus." Now, I'm 18 years old. I'm a brand new Christian, and I think I was there with Sean Donalyn and Donalyn's parents, is before any of us were married. And I'm sitting there with thousands of people. We're in Salt Lake City. There's thousands of people in this stadium. And I'm at the very top looking over hordes of people. And, I've decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. And then, though none go with me, still I will follow. And I remember standing there with all those people singing that song, and just the realization and the Holy Spirit speaking to me, if nobody goes with you, you still have to go where I tell you to go. And now just tears flowing down my eyes. I'm choking up even thinking about it. But tears flowing down my eyes saying, if no one go with me, still I have to follow Jesus. It's not about what everybody else is doing. It's not about loyalty to my family. It's not about any of those things. It's about loyalty to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And that's what Nehemiah had that these other people didn't have. He had loyalty to Jesus, and yet in the well, to God, but you know what I mean. But in the grand scheme of things, those other people didn't. But in all that God did, it was still a witness to them. It was still a benefit to them. These people who had tried to sell him out still were under the protection of that wall. Still were part of the nation of Israel. And even though they're like, oh, he's not such a bad guy, try to get to know him. It's okay. It didn't matter, because Nehemiah was going to follow God, even though those closest to him, some of those people closest to him, weren't going to follow. And I think that's true for all of us. Amen?